Today we're going to pick up the waterfront build right where we left off, hopping one lot over where we're going to fill in this entire area so that we can have a nice, satisfying, and continuous stretch of development all the way from downtown to the industrial area. For inspiration, we'll be looking at this industrial park in Duluth, which I thought had just too intriguing of a look to not include in the city. I want to break the build into two areas of focus. First, the main building with this kind of patchwork looking roof, and then this big open yard. We'll start with the main building. The big challenge with putting this building together is that even though the roof looks pretty patchwork, as far as I can tell, the building itself is pretty new and the facade, the exterior, is pretty cohesive. So that basically meant that I had to draw from a select palette of assets and then manipulate them using PO as needed so that I could make all these different shapes of buildings and types of roofs and fit them together without sacrificing the exterior look. Of course, there are going to be exceptions during the build, and I did kind of want to play up the patchwork aspect, even if it's not perfectly in line with the real-life building. But overall, especially for this part of the building facing the main road, I wanted to stick with that cohesive look for the facade. I'm using these warehouse buildings with the roofs removed for the facade part, so we can have this kind of generic industrial-looking cladding all around the building. And I think the texture also holds up pretty nicely to being squished and manipulated around with PO, which is going to be really important for this build. Then above those, I'm using these older looking industrial buildings, which I chose because they have a nice plain facade, but also the roof texture looks pretty nice, at least as far as industrial roofs go. I'm using two different assets because I wanted to get this two-tone look, which is something you find at the inspiration, even though the real-life one looks a little more cheerful than mine. One handy feature of PO is that once you've grouped objects together like this, you can use the distort function on the entire group to manipulate them together, although not at the same level of granularity as when you're in the main customization tool where you can adjust every vertex. But that's really nice because I can kind of just make these blocks and then copy and paste them and adjust them as needed without losing the ability to edit each individual piece if I need to go back and do that. With this area around back, I wanted to switch up the assets I was using. So they have the more cohesive appearance around front to make a good impression on all the people passing by, but things get a bit weirder when you go around back. For that, I'm mostly using these light industrial buildings by Spence because I feel like they are plain enough to fit in with the bits around front, but they have a bit more of a grimy edge to the textures. Also, they all have really interesting geometry to them, which is something that's going to help motivate some of the detailing later on. With that being said, I am going to use a few different other types of assets as well, like these shed assets, and then you can see this brick one on the left. In the inspiration, this end of the warehouse is a bit angled, so I wanted to include that detail here by having this entire lumpy lobe stick out at a slight angle. And that is a sentence that has probably never been said before. Now, there's a bit more to this industrial park than just the big building itself. There are also a bunch of smaller satellite buildings, so I wanted to take inspiration from that. I'm going to work counterclockwise for the most part, going around the big building, following the inspiration when I can, but making some adjustments as needed to fit the space that we have. On this side of the lot, there's a big asphalt lot with a couple warehouse-like buildings stationed around it. It looks pretty plain at the moment, but this is all hopefully going to come to life in the detail phase of the video in a bit. Then around the front, there's this two-story blue building, which I guess is basically like the administration or visitor's entrance or something like that. And since I didn't have a two-story building in my collection that quite fit the dreary look that I was going for, I'm going to use this office building and manipulate it a bit with PO to get the right look. Eventually, the whole area that is in line with this building, parallel to the road, is going to be a publicly accessible off-street parking area. And the service road that I'm drawing out here will be fenced and gated off from that area. So that's going to present some interesting detailing opportunities. But for the time being, I'm just going to carry this service road all the way over here and put down a basic outline of what will be the big outdoor storage yard. I'm trying to fit it pretty snugly up against the track, leaving the coal dock, just to make sure that we have enough room to put all these details down and still have some negative space left. But I'm leaving just enough room here to let a bit of protective foliage grow. One aspect of the build that I'm a little bit ambivalent about is the rail access that we have heading into this half of the warehouse. Apparently in real life they do accept trains here to offload whatever goods they might have that they need to be stored. I do think it looks cool, but I'm a little unsure of whether or not I should try to make this functional in some way. And that's something I've had a little bit of trouble with the last couple of dock builds. If you've watched those, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But for now, I couldn't really decide exactly what I wanted to do, so I just decided to leave it non-functional for the time being, but something to chew on. Maybe I could go back and make that work. There's also this abandoned rail spur on the other side of the dock, which I'm thinking would be a remnant of whatever industry was here on this dock in the days before the industrial park. Ignoring the rail issue, the functionality here is going to be pretty straightforward. I'm basically going to use a mix of office, industrial, and warehouse block services, which I'm sure you're all familiar with this technique by now, to generate a decent amount of jobs and traffic. As usual, I'm going to adjust the spawn points and the types of vehicles that can spawn as well, which hopefully will add a bit of realism to the traffic we get driving around here, because we all know that the traffic in Cities Skylines is extremely realistic. And then these warehouse blocks, instead of trying to imagine like all the different sorts of goods that they have stored in here, I just decided to have it store commercial zone goods because that's going to be the most useful for the city. And it also allows me to select really generic looking vehicles so that we don't have like ore trucks and stuff popping out of our warehouse that maybe stores ore, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. Finally, I thought it might be interesting to have a post office block as well, with the idea being that there's some kind of business that operates a local delivery service delivering whatever product they sell to individual customers around the city. At the time, I only had the kind of usual suspects available for mail vehicles, but later on I did download a few more generic looking ones so that we don't have FedEx operating out of our generic industrial park. Not that I have anything against FedEx necessarily. Industrial clutter details are not necessarily my strong suit, and industrial clutter is all there is to detail on this build, other than a little bit of foliage. But I guess there's no better way to learn than by doing. Plus, if I get stuck, I can always just go and look at Google Maps and copy exactly what I see. To start, I'm going to quickly arrange some shrubbery along this eastern side of the dock to represent that the track and a little bit of surrounding land has been left completely untouched, even as they've developed the rest of the lot. Maybe they just don't need this land enough to bother with the expense and the time of ripping up the track, or maybe they plan on someday reclaiming the land here, and so they're just waiting for that project to tear up the old track. Either way, I get a chance to carefully arrange some overgrown bushes one by one, which is lots of fun and is just like how it works in real life, actually. One of the things that always catches my eye, both in real life and also looking at satellite imagery, is the different kinds of surfaces that you get. And that's something I've been trying to focus on a lot for the last few industrial builds. So for example, here you have this small grassy track going along one side of the shed or warehouse or whatever it's called. And then you have the big solid asphalt lot. Well, it's not solid at the moment, but it will be in a second. And there's also this overgrown area on the other side of the shed. So I think that kind of variation helps to add some realism and some visual interest, but it also keeps me from just using surface painter to fill in an entire location with concrete or just plop down a million asphalt props. And that kind of helps me focus on how the different lots are spaced out and arranged relative to one another. I think the upshot of all that is that it helps me be more mindful of how much breathing room each building has and each lot has. And despite talking about all that, I am actually just placing down random industrial props. So let's do that first, and then we'll go back to the surfaces. I always felt like I kind of avoided doing these big industrial builds in the past because I would get sort of overwhelmed looking at all the clutter that they have lying around. At least it looks like clutter to me. I'm sure it all has a purpose, and I just figured I'd never be able to select the right types of assets, and I wouldn't be able to make it look good. At some point, I realized that was a really stupid reason to not try something, so what I ended up doing was trying to make it as easy as possible on myself to detail. The main way I did that was putting together a group of industrial props and tagging them all in Find It. And that way I have this really basic and limited set of props to choose from, which just removes that initial kind of overwhelm of having to think about and track down a specific asset for a specific spot. Of course, sometimes I do have a specific search term that I type in, like especially for things that I have a lot of that are fairly useful, like containers or concrete or asphalt, but I always have that tag system to fall back on when I just need to put down a bunch of little things and scatter those around. I feel like that's actually helped a lot in speeding up the detailing process in a build like this, especially where we have a large variety of props in use. Although that being said, this build did take me forever to record and edit, but that's just kind of because of the scale of this place. Anyway, I've also been using that kind of tag system for other categories for builds that will come after this one, like foliage or houses for specific areas of the city. And I found that the key for me was to keep the selection of assets limited and really taking the time to curate a small group of really high quality assets ahead of time. In the past, I used to just sort of tag everything that looked like it might vaguely fit into whatever build I was doing, and that helped to like group things together, but it wouldn't really help me much with the decision making in the moment. One thing these surfaces kind of remind me of are the different uses of asphalt versus concrete at airports, which is something I spent a lot of time working on back when I built the Todos Santos airport. I wonder if there's the same sort of logic going on in this kind of location, where the driving surfaces are paved with asphalt, which apparently holds up to movement better, and then the surfaces where vehicles are parked or stopped for loading would be concrete, which apparently holds static weight better. I don't know if that's the same sort of logic going on here, but even if that's not the case, I think it's still a useful enough assumption to use to try to figure out what kind of surfaces I want to put down, and just have that sort of logic in place to bypass any hesitation I have, and just kind of eliminate that decision making and have this heuristic to go to. An example of that is this little corner area here, where I'm going to use concrete slabs since it seems to be some sort of loading or staging area. One thing I also saw here is there seems to be this kind of opening down into the void. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with like a drainage system or something, but I wanted to build that here. So I'm going to use the clipping building that comes with a big parking lot road pack and then build up a little structure around it. And I have to say, I'm pretty happy with how it turns out. I'm going to build this little facility on the corner of the dock here, which I assume in real life would be used for ship loading. On their website, it does say that they accept ships here. I wanted to make it stand out a bit, so I'm yoinking a couple of the more interesting details from the inspiration. I'm using two types of wharf, both this corrugated metal one and then the concrete one next to it. And then I'm also going to replace the driving surface here with pavement or concrete, which I think looks kind of nice as far as paved surfaces go, I guess. And it also serves to separate the two types of asphalt that I have, the rougher one on the right and then the plainer one on the left. I mean, you could just transition from one to the other, but I think having this lighter colored surface in between almost makes it look like more natural of a transition. I don't know exactly what kind of stuff they transfer from ships here in real life, but since the angle here is a little awkward, I wanted the ease of using something that comes in network form. And the only thing I had in network form were these pipes. So I'm going to use those to connect it up to the tower here in the main building. Presumably there's some kind of tank inside to store whatever liquid they suck out of the ship, but I don't do interiors, so I don't have to detail that. Although, of course, now that I'm saying that, there was this fortuitous hole over here that happened to have built-in pipes in the building running toward it. So I thought this would be as good a spot as any to add another tank. In the center of this yard here, I'm going to combine a couple of things from the inspiration. There's an elongated shed or like workshop of some kind, and then there's also a long enclosed conveyor belt with this bluish tinge to it. Both of these things at the real warehouse have these nice rusty roofs, so I thought that they would go well together here, especially against the backdrop of grimy asphalt. Other than that, this area just needs a whole bunch of those clutter props that I was talking about before, and also a little bit of overgrown foliage. Moseying down toward the outdoor yard, I wanted to add in a few roads to the interior, which are going to be used solely for navigation, while the exterior roads that we put down earlier are just a kind of a convenient way to define the border of the yard and to use for IMT work as well. Now, I want this whole area to have a relatively cohesive paved look, so I'm going to fill it all in with asphalt, but I also used IMT to add in these temporary decals so that I can remember where the potential driving lanes are while detailing the area. And I also put down a bunch of stain decals to roughen everything up a bit as usual. And I adjusted the entrance here to be at a bit more of an angle, which is going to be an important detail in a moment when we get to detailing that area. But first, we're going to get to work on detailing the rest of the yard. We're going to start with the warehouse. I wanted to give it a few details to make it look more accessible to both people and vehicles. So we have some pedestrian entrances, but then also a couple of variations with the truck entrances and bays. So there's this loading bay here, and then also a ramp leading up to this door, which I'm going to make with these prefab house props, adding this nice yellow stripe on top so they're a little bit more visible, and adjusting their shape, of course, to just add a slight angle to the ramp. Both the ramp and the kind of exterior bay are both things that I took directly from the inspiration in Duluth. At the entrance I mentioned before, there's some kind of way station, at least that's what it looks like to me. Not sure exactly if that's what it is, but alongside it is a big shed, which I guess in the way station instance would be for like inspecting trucks or their cargo if need be. I could be wrong on that, but that's just what I'm remembering about this kind of setup. I found it kind of difficult to define the area that I wanted this entrance to take up, especially since there's really no natural border to it other than the entrance road itself on one side. But I ended up cordoning off the entrance area from the rest of the yard with these big blocks so that you could walk through if you wanted to, but it keeps trucks from bypassing the proper entrance. Now, I didn't have a proper way station prop in my collection, so I just made my own using a couple of asphalt pieces and these ramps on either side. In this little area that's remaining, I made a little pull-off for either employee parking or maybe people who are visiting the industrial park for whatever reason. Do people do that? I don't know. Later on, we're also going to add some barriers further down the entrance road to direct traffic even further. But for now, I wanted to start working our way counterclockwise around the yard to fill in the rest of it with details. On Google Maps, this yard is tagged as being a construction company, but it does appear to be on the same property as the warehouse. I'm not sure exactly how the real-life arrangement works, but I'm going to treat our version as if they're either a single company operating kind of two different arms, or they're two companies who have a very intimate arrangement in terms of how they share the yard space. So you get a pretty much indiscriminate mixture of construction materials for the contractor and shipping and storage related stuff for the warehouse. One time I went to a place that was sort of like this to buy like this tiny pack of shingles for a shed that I was building. So I went in and paid for them, and I thought that they might like go in the back and bring it out there, but they had me drive like deep into the yard past these big rows of materials, which was kind of an interesting experience. So I wanted to evoke that memory here by making these big rows of I-beams in the corner of the yard. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any pre-made stacks, so I had to make my own, which I can't say is something I recommend doing. It's not exactly the most thrilling thing to do. Although I did save a little bit of time by making them hollow, just placing the ones on the outside and the ones on top. It probably ends up being kind of an excessive amount of material, but maybe they just got a big order in for a new skyscraper or something. So now we just need a place to put a new skyscraper, and we can make that a reality, I guess. Now, I don't know if I-beams are moved by like crane or forklift. Probably not forklift, but I did find this adorable forklift as bus vehicle on the workshop. So I just had to have some of these driving around the industrial park. I'm going to make a new bus line that stops at the I-beams and also a couple of other areas, and then add in a couple of the forklift vehicles. Off camera, I also downloaded a generic van vehicle that also operates as a bus. So I added a couple of those as well on a different bus line. And I hope that that is going to bump up the amount of traffic within the industrial park, which I think is nice because most of the other activity only enters, goes to a specific spot, and then leaves directly without spending too much time driving around the facility itself. So hopefully this will just bump up the visual activity. Now that we've successfully cluttered up the yard with all that stuff, except for these trailers that are staged out front of the warehouse that I'm putting down now, it's time to move on to most of the detailing around front is going to be defined by what's open to the public versus what's fenced off. I'm going to add a gate at each entrance using the open version of the gate asset because trucks are pretty much going to constantly be coming in and out. And we can just imagine that they open automatically. Unfortunately, I don't think there are any animated gate props on the workshop, so we're just going to have to stick with these static ones. I suppose I could make something with PO, but earlier I mentioned how there would be different surfaces for the public area and the private area, and I'm going to implement that here. So we'll have concrete slabs up against the warehouse building. I'm going to add in the decals to represent that in a moment. And then there's a mishmash of different surfaces in the public area, which mostly consists of parking lots, which is kind of easy to have these different sorts of surfaces for. I'm going to use this satellite building as a convenient spot to jog the fence line back a ways so that we can have it run between the public and private zones. And that also allows this gate and the ones after it to be set back from the road, which is probably a bit better for traffic. While I was over here, I figured I would also spruce up the main office out front with a little bit of landscaping, which in this industrial context really just means a sidewalk running from the parking lot to the front door. So that's exciting. For the actual surfaces themselves that I've been blabbering on about, I just used expansion joint decals, stain decals, the usual, and a few cement slabs that have a warmer texture to look like a more recently repaved area at the entrance where there's going to be a lot more wear and tear. The smaller yard over on this side of the complex gets a similar treatment, this time with the little variation being that one of the lines of parking spots is painted on a different surface than the others, which I think is kind of a cute little detail, if I do say so myself. The clutter details in this yard are gonna kind of mirror the ones in the larger yard, except they're on a smaller scale. There's a bit more grime, a bit more junk, and it's just generally a rung up on the ladder of seediness. One thing that a few people had pointed out from the last two builds was that I totally forgot to do a lighting pass, and they're totally right. I'm not going to go back and fix that for the coal or grain dock at the moment, but I'm going to make sure to light this place up while I'm thinking of it. I'm going to try to keep it on the sparser end, so I'm using these wooden lampposts to light up the main routes through the industrial park, along with the parking lots. And then I'm adding wall-mounted lights around the exterior of the main building, where they make sense. And finally, the big yard is going to get these more modern metal lampposts, which I think look a little bit more appropriate for lighting up larger open areas. In the spirit of not having to come back later and add in things that I forgot to do, thanks past me, I did do a touch of detailing off camera. First, I added a few roof objects to the roof. I also ran some power lines along the main avenue, which I think is pretty much a must for any industrial area. And I also did a very simple texturing and foliage detail on this kind of empty rail corridor. I was actually thinking that this could be prime land for redevelopment later on in the series, so let me know if you think that's a good idea, and if so, maybe what we could put there. Of course, I also removed these hilariously out-of-place decals, which is pretty satisfying. And that is the story of how you spend a month of your life building an industrial park in a video game and editing a video about it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you to this month's channel members, with a special shout out to my $5 tier members, New, Peter J, and Victor Sellen. And thank you for watching.